So yesterday we had ourselves the longest contract in the NHL signed. And the reason I say that, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, is because Sebastian Aho signed himself an 8-year extension, which will take him to the end of 2032 with the Carolina Hurricanes. The reason I said it was the longest deal in the league is because, as per Frank Saravelli, Sebastian Aho joins the Ilya Sorokin party as the only 2 NHL players locked up till that time frame. The deal goes as follows. It's 8 years long, $78 million in total, so the AAV is $9.75 mil. And what I wanted to do in this video was not necessarily go over Sebastian Aho and the career he's had, because you don't need me to tell you, but he's been a very good player. But what I wanted to also do was talk about how this relates to the Vancouver Canucks and the Toronto Maple Leafs. Because after this Aho contract was signed, you saw a boatload of analysts and fans of both of these separate teams saying, okay, well, if Sebastian Aho got this, then that means this other player should get that, or this other player is not worth as much, or this player is worth more, etc., etc. Let's talk about Aho, and then let's talk about William Nylander of Toronto, as well as Elias Pettersson on Vancouver. So, on to Sebastian Aho firstly. The guy signed his contract, $9.75 million a year. He was already making a boatload of money beforehand. This was 5 years ago when he had signed the offer sheet with the Montreal Canadiens, $8.46 million a year. Only for the contract to be matched by the Hurricanes. And for the most part, Sebastian Aho has lived up to the contract. He has been worth that amount of money, as last year he had 67 points in 75 games played. Now sure, that point production number is not the best he has ever had. He had an 81-point year in 79 games in 21-22, and multiple other point-per-game years there. His career high was actually 2018-19. 83 points and 82 games played there. So he's a multiple-time 30-goal scorer, close to getting 40 goals in 2019-20, 38 goals in 68 games. So he's a very poised, very skilled, very offensively capable center. And for a lot of Carolina Hurricanes fans, this has been the norm ever since he made his debut with the team in 2016. What more could you ask out of a second-round guy? He has definitely become a stud, he has become a superstar elite player, but because this contract was signed in the ways that it had been, there's a whole bunch of discussion going on about other guys. Now, before we dive into that, let's just get the time frame sorted out here. Sebastian Aho is 26 years old. He was drafted in 2015. If we go over to Toronto, William Nylander is 27 years old, drafted in 2014. And if you go over to Vancouver, Elias Pettersson is 24 years old, drafted in 2017. So they're all roughly in the same age range. Sebastian Aho is sandwiched nicely in between William Nylander and Elias Pettersson in terms of their age. Yeah, I had to finish that sentence because if I didn't, that entire thing would have sounded really bad. But let's go over to some of the discourse talking about William Nylander and Elias Pettersson, because both of these guys are expiring this upcoming offseason next year, and they're both eligible to sign extensions at the moment. With William Nylander in Toronto, it's going to be kind of dangerous because the guy is going to be a UFA upon his expiration. For Elias Pettersson, it's a little different. He is going to be an RFA, so the Canucks still do have some control over him. But when it comes to the William Nylander thing, we had seen a lot of Toronto Maple Leafs fans going out there saying things like this. Here's a tweet from Nick Richard. This contract doesn't exactly help out the Leafs in Nylander negotiations. Yes, Aho is a center, but he's never had a season as productive as Nylander's 22-23. Then you have yourself Steve Dangle, who went there and replied this. Between Aho being a center and this deal being 8 years, I think this actually works against Nylander's camp a bit. If you want years that far into the future, you gotta pay. And Aho took something like $500,000 less than Nylander's max ask. He also had a bigger conversation on the Toronto Maple Leafs subreddit. Take a look at this post made by Face WIA Bonfire. Nylander has to come in under 9.75. There's no way he surpasses Aho, right? And reading some of the comments, that's what a lot of them seem to believe. 8.8 for Nylander, who is a winger and not as good as Aho, seems fair. A reply here says this. While I do agree that Nylander getting 8.8 is fair, Aho has never had a season as productive as the one Nylander just had. 40 goals, 87 points. And the counter-argument to that is saying that defensive-minded centers like Aho and Lindholm usually don't get a lot of points, but they're more valuable to their teams and their lines. Another comment says this: to me, this Sebastian Aho contract helps the Leafs, because Aho is a number 1C. That's the highest paid position in hockey. Willie is not a center, let alone a number 1 center on any team. It hasn't worked when it's been tried. This puts William Nylander right in that $8.8 million range. Willie can cry foul all he wants. This just further goes to show that nobody is going to pay him 10, not even the high 9s. The only way he's getting that is if he hits 50 next year. And then there's an argument saying, yeah, but Marner. And the reply actually says this: Marner plays in the PK, and he has had back-to-back 90-point seasons. He's a better player overall than Nylander, but he was overpaid by the last GM by $1.5 million. And so there are a whole bunch of discussions to have about this process here, how William Nylander's contract is affected by Sebastian Aho. If it's up to me, you ask me who am I taking, Nylander or Aho, I'm going Aho. Like, I'm building a team around him first, before I decide to build a team around Nylander. I'd say that when it comes to individual skill and talent, you could debate that Nylander has more offense to give, but I would say that Sebastian Aho and his responsible two-way play definitely puts him in a more valued territory amongst players in the National Hockey League. So for him to get a $9.75 million AAV salary, it makes this Nylander thing seem a lot more bleak if you're in that William Nylander camp and wanting to get a higher pay raise. Now, if you go over to the Vancouver Canucks side of things, the conversation is a little bit different. Here's what Jeff Pettersson went out there and said: Elias Pettersson's camp has a new baseline. Aho's career highs are 38 goals and 83 points. Elias Pettersson had 39 goals and 102 points last season. Now for Petey, he's younger. He's more productive. You could say he's better. In fact, I would go out there and say I'd rather build a team around Pettersson than I would around Aho. And this is where Canucks fans seem to be a lot more peaceful with this thing compared to the Toronto fans talking about Nylander. Here's the comment section of the Jeff Pettersson's tweets post on the Canucks sub. Pettersson was going to get more than 10 anyway. I think 10.5 to 11 million is probably going to be likely. Aho for 8 years seems cheap, with the cap going up next year. This commenter goes out there and says that anything under 88 million is a win. Let's assume 8 years, so anything under 11 million would be seen as a win for Petey. And, this conversation doesn't need to be much longer. I think that Pettersson is better than Aho, and Aho getting a contract that is just $250,000 more than Bo Horvat, for example, kind of goes to show that you can win these deals without really having to do much. Like, Aho signed for a pretty reasonable dollar amount, all things considered, and even if he reached maybe $10 million, I would not say that that's a bad contract. This dollar amount is worth it for the player. It's only a slight pay raise over what he was making earlier with that Montreal offer sheet contract. And for Elias Pettersson, the magnitude as to which he is better than Aho, I think justifies a much higher dollar amount that would say, yeah, let's say 10.5, maybe even $11 million. Plus the age range there is a little bit in Pettersson's favor too, because he's 2 years younger than Sebastian Aho. That it's going to be really intriguing to see where this Pettersson thing goes. Also, the fact that the Canucks do hold on to Pettersson's rights as he expires next year, it's going to make things a lot easier and more streamlined just to get everything done and not to stress out and worry about it like a lot of Leafs fans are with this William Nylander thing. So, at the end of the day, when it comes to Sebastian Aho and his contract, Pettersson, I think this is okay. He was going to get a lot of money anyway. Sebastian Aho getting 9.75 just kind of cements Petey in that $10+ million territory. For William Nylander, you could say that this actually hurts Nylander's party and his negotiations because the money he was going with was 10 mil. So if Sebastian Aho, who is a more valuable player, goes out there and gets less as a center, then you could definitely debate that Nylander and his party may not have all the bargaining power that they want. Of course, we have to see what happens with Matthews as well, because that guy is also going to get affected by this. But either way, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below if you're a Toronto Maple Leafs fan or a Vancouver Canucks fan. How do the Sebastian Aho contract negotiations affect your perceptions with Nylander and or Pettersson? Do you think Pettersson is of the same caliber of talent as Aho? Do you think that Petey should be getting the same range? Petey produced 100 points this past year. Aho's never done that. Petey had more goals in this previous season than Aho has had in his career high too. So what exactly is the magnitude of how much greater that is? How does that reflect in the dollar amount? Same thing for William Nylander, who has also outproduced Aho too. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.